It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. The bride, glowing in her elegant white dress, stood beside the man she loved, ready to start their journey together. Family and friends had gathered, the venue was decorated beautifully, and everything seemed perfect, but no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. Right in the middle of the celebration, a moment of joy turned into complete chaos. The groom, dressed in a sharp cream-colored suit, reached out toward the bride's young daughter. The little girl, no more than 5 or 6, stood in her delicate pink dress, looking up at him with innocent eyes. Then, something shocking happened. He swung his hand toward her. Gasps filled the room as guests froze in disbelief. The bride's eyes widened in horror. Had he just hit her daughter? The air became heavy with silence. Some guests exchanged nervous glances, unsure if they had really seen what they thought they saw. Others instinctively took a step forward, ready to intervene. The little girl didn't cry, but the look on her face said it all. Confusion, shock, hurt, and the bride, her entire world seemed to shatter in an instant. No one could understand why the groom would do something so unthinkable. Was it an accident? A misunderstanding? Or was there something much deeper going on beneath the surface? The tension in the room was unbearable. The bride, once filled with excitement for her new life, now stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, just as people began to react, something unexpected happened. The groom's expression shifted, and he stepped forward as if to explain. But before he could say anything, the bride's mother, who had been sitting quietly in the front row, stood up. Her face was unreadable, but her presence alone sent a ripple through the crowd. And at that moment, everyone knew. The wedding was about to take a turn no one would ever forget. The room remained eerily silent as all eyes shifted to the bride's mother. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a storm. She took a slow step forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The bride turned to her, searching for some kind of explanation, some kind of reassurance, but none came. The groom, still standing with his hand half raised, looked like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. The little girl stood still, her small hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't crying, but the way she stared up at him, like she was trying to understand what had just happened, made the moment even heavier. Whispers started spreading through the crowd. Guests leaned in, murmuring to one another. Some looked at the bride with sympathy, others at the groom with suspicion. A few people pulled out their phones, not to record, but to send hurried texts to family members who weren't there. No one knew what to do. Should someone step in? Should the wedding continue as if nothing had happened? The bride's mother finally stopped just a few feet away from the groom. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but firm. "What did you just do?" The groom blinked, his face unreadable. "It's not what it looked like," he said quickly, glancing around as if searching for support. "I wasn't trying to hurt her." The bride, still in shock, barely managed to speak. "Then what were you trying to do?" Her voice cracked, filled with emotion. For a moment, it seemed like he wouldn't answer. Then, taking a deep breath, he'd opened his mouth. But before he could explain, the little girl suddenly took a step back. "I don't like him," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But somehow, those 4 words echoed louder than anything else in the room. The bride's heart sank. This was supposed to be the man she trusted, the man who would protect her daughter just as much as he would protect her. But now, Dope crept in, cold and unwelcome. And as she turned to look at him, she realized this moment had changed everything. A heavy silence settled over the room, stretching for what felt like forever. The little girl's words still hung in the air, filling every corner of the grand wedding hall. "I don't like him." Simple yet powerful. The bride felt something inside her shift, a nagging feeling she had ignored for too long now pushing its way to the surface. The groom's face hardened for a brief moment before he quickly masked it with a nervous chuckle. "She's just overwhelmed," he said, forcing a smile. "It's a big day for everyone." He turned toward the little girl, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, his voice softer now. "It was just a little playful tap." But the bride's mother wasn't buying it. "A playful tap," she repeated, her eyes narrowing. She had been watching him closely all day, and something about him had never sat right with her. Now her suspicions felt justified. She turned to her daughter, her expression unreadable, twisting through memories she had brushed aside. Had there been other moments like this? Small things she had ignored? The way her fiancé sometimes dismissed her daughter's feelings, the impatience in his voice when he thought no one was listening, the way her daughter had always hesitated around him. The guests remained frozen, their curiosity growing with every second that passed. A few of the groom's family members shifted uncomfortably, while the bride's closest friends exchanged concerned glances. The atmosphere had changed completely. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was something else entirely. Then, as if sensing the weight of the moment, the little girl took another step back, clutching the edge of her dress. She looked up at her mother, eyes wide and filled with something unspoken. Fear? Or was it something even deeper, something she had been trying to tell her all along? And just like that, the bride knew this was no longer about the wedding. It was about something much bigger. The bride's breath grew unsteady as she looked at her daughter, then at the man she was about to marry. Everything around her blurred, the flowers, the guests, the music still playing softly in the background. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, and she realized she was standing at a crossroads. The groom reached for her hand, his grip firm but slightly too tight. "Let's not make a big deal out of this," he murmured under his breath, his jaw tense. "We can talk about it later." But the bride couldn't ignore the unease creeping through her veins. His words didn't feel comforting. They felt like a warning. Her mother noticed the hesitation and stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her daughter's arm. "If you're not sure," she whispered, "you don't have to go through with this." The words sent a ripple of energy through the bride's body. Not sure. She had been sure, or at least she thought she had been. The little girl's grip tightened around the fabric of her dress as she stared at the man in front of her. She wasn't crying, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. And then, for the first time, she spoke up again, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's not nice to me when you're not looking." The bride's stomach dropped. A cold chill ran through her, making her feel like the room had suddenly lost all its warmth. She turned sharply to the groom, searching his face for a reaction. His expression flickered, just for a second. It wasn't shock. It wasn't confusion. It was something else, something darker. A few guests gasped as they overheard the little girl's words. The whispers grew louder, tension thickening in the air. The groom forced out a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "She's a kid," he said, shrugging. "Sometimes they say things for attention." His voice was light, but his eyes weren't. The bride suddenly felt like she couldn't breathe. Every little moment, every ignored instinct, every brushed-aside feeling came rushing back at once. And now, with all eyes on her, she had to decide, would she go through with this wedding, or would she finally listen to the one person who had been trying to warn her all along? The bride's hands felt cold, her pulse racing as she stared at the man she had once trusted. The weight of her daughter's words clung to her like a heavy fog, making it impossible to think clearly. She wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe nerves were getting the best of her. But deep down she knew. This wasn't the first time she had felt something was off. It was just the first time she couldn't ignore it. The guests were no longer just whispering. Some were outright murmuring, eyes darting between the bride, the groom, and the little girl. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What was supposed to be a celebration now felt like a moment teetering on the edge of disaster. Then, just when the tension seemed unbearable, a voice cut through the noise. "I need to say something." It was one of the groom's groomsmen, standing near the front. His face was pale, his fingers fidgeting at his side. The room turned toward him in unison, waiting. The groom's expression darkened. "Not now," he snapped, his voice low but sharp. But the groomsman shook his head. "No, I can't stay quiet. Not after what she just said. He looked at the bride, then down at the little girl. His voice wavered, but there was determination in his eyes. I should have said something sooner, but I didn't think it was my place. He swallowed hard.